that area of rock that moved, that fell in. Now, you're assuming that if there's more movement, it's just going to go straight down. What happens if it goes sideways one way or the other? You know, would that movement cause that fracturing to go further? Can we have further fracturing?
I don't think we have to worry about the stability of the salt dome, okay? And now you've got a big column of very weak rock, so any additional movement is going to tend to be in that area because it's already weak, it's already broken up. And so any additional movement is going to be in that area. But the stability of the salt dome, because of the nature of the salt, it's a very good, solid support system, and it's very difficult to propagate fractures very far at all in salt. So I think the other caverns are fine. We are dealing with something that occurred on the edge of the dome. All the other caverns are interior to that.
The signature of the gas coming out of the sinkhole, you said y'all determined that. Is it the same as the signature of the gas coming out in the bubbles and all the bayous?
Yeah, most of the bubbles in the bayous and such are formation gas. Okay, it's coming from deep down, but because it's moving laterally and coming up, the further we get away from the sinkhole, the more it's mixing with swamp gas. And so you see that mixture, but you see the very distinct signature of formation gas in what's coming up in the bayous. So there's no doubt in my mind that what you're seeing in the bayous is coming from deep down.
I want to know why Shaw is not doing the vent well on Texas brine property.
Dun, dun, dun.
Simply put, the emergency declaration that was issued to Texas Brine asked them to do certain items. We knew that the gas was located there based upon past observations by Texas Brine. So to ask them to go back there and drill it makes sense. Why were we drilling the ORW4, which is the latest water well, is because we already have an access agreement with the landowner. And we did not want to waste time having Texas Brine try to go out and get that agreement.
Yes, ma'am.
What's the risk for the people that it's a mandatory evacuation, but not a forced evacuation? What's the risk level you see at present?
I think the evacuation, the mandatory evacuation is appropriate.
Just like what is the risk? What's the concern as to?
I would not have my grandkids living there.
Final questions here?
Yeah. My question to you is this, okay? When this collapse originally started, or the first seismic event, was at the end of May, okay? After that, it was so strong, I don't know what it would be on the Richter scale because there was no monitoring. It was so strong. How far out do you think there is cracking or cracks in the cap rock, bedrock, some of the clay, whatever, going out? Do you have an idea about how far out it goes?
Not really. We'll know once we shoot the seismic, but I think the sinkhole and the subsidence area, the circle I had up there, I think that's probably a reasonable approximation of how far out some of the fracturing and stuff went right now.
I'm asking you that because if you look on the other end over here, you have bubbles that have come up way outside of there.
Yeah.
And so my question is, do you think that fracture in some of this rock formation is that far out and much further?
I don't know. What we're evaluating as we evolve here, part of the thing with the gas coming up in the alluvial aquifer is it can spread out very fast. But the bayous, below the bayous, think of them as a column of sand, okay? Now, we'll have a picture next time I come, where there's sand that goes down deep. So it comes up in the alluvium and it can spread out, and then it comes up in the bayous. So it doesn't have to have fractures all the way out to come up in the bayous. But one of the things we're tasked with is determining the gas pathway for the bayous. We know how big that area is. It's a good sized area. But that doesn't necessarily mean you have fractures all over that, because it can spread out in the sand and gravel.
This will be our last question, then we'll ask everybody who has additional questions to stay, and they've agreed to stay around a little longer.
When the sinkhole occurred, the lake water and the bayou water dropped. The level dropped, which is theory reminds
That would not be, that would be consistent with a large hydraulic fracture that shook things up. And we see that in the seismic. So the fact that you noticed water level dropped at the same time the sinkhole occurred, that was a major event. And the fact that you saw some water movement in some of the bayous in the lake would be consistent with that type of event.
What about fresh water getting into the salt dome?
Pardon?
Fresh
What
water
about
getting into
fresh
the salt.
water getting into the salt dome?
I don't think that's a problem, because as I showed you on the graph, we've got high TDS in the sinkhole, and I think that whole fracture system is now full of brine.
The whole sinkhole full of brine too?
The whole fracture system, we think the sinkhole starts off fresh water and it gets more briny the deeper you go into the sinkhole.
So I see you have that worst case scenario of how big the sinkhole can get. True?
Yep.
It can only get X amount of feet big. But how big around the sinkhole will it kill the trees and everything that's alive? Will it be a big ghost town out there like it looks down right now?
I understand your question. I honestly haven't looked at
I
that.
mean, I know you got those bones that's containing the oil. We can pick up the oil. But how much of the salt water is underneath that's leaching into the swamp that there's no way to contain? How big of an area of trees and anything that's alive is it going to kill?
I don't know.
He's going to, yes.
Yeah, I just want to, I know there's a lot of question and concern about brine, and what we have going for us when we're dealing with brine is its density, or its weight relative to fresh water. There were some questions earlier about what became of the brine that was displaced when the solids came into the cavern. One would think that if you had a massive void space that was brine filled that suddenly collapsed, there would just be a geyser of brine water. We didn't see that. A big part of the reason that we didn't see that is because it was a very slow process, as evidenced by the tremors that took place for about 2 months. So the cavern was filling incrementally. And with each large piece that fell, there was probably some volume of brine water that was squeezed up, if you will. But because it's saturated brine, it's much heavier than the connate, or the naturally occurring water that's outside the salt mass. And where you have sands that come up and truncate against the salt mass, there is porosity. And so much of that brine water probably found a sand formation and simply went away. And we know that these zones exist because around salt domes we have oil and gas production. We have porous formations that contain oil and gas and salt water. But it's not the same salt water, it's a much lighter salt water. To your question about the bayou and the lake, water level dropping. The clay formation that we speak to that overlies the sands in the aquifer is relatively impermeable. And so swamp water, surface water is essentially perched on top of that clay. And when that barrier was broken, it allowed fresh water on top of that clay to flow into and past the clay and into the sands underneath the clay. And the reason we know that that clay is relatively impermeable is because it's what's trapping the gas. So if it's trapping gas, it's definitely holding up water too. So the two occasions where we've seen relatively big pieces fall into the sinkhole, we have seen fluid level changes, where it drops down and then it comes right back up. So it's a short-term effect.
So is it brine water or is it fresh water?
It's predominantly fresh water, but there is brine in the deeper portions. And it's,
Shouldn't that fresh water wash away that?
it will dilute it ultimately. One of the things that we have going for us is that because we're in the business of producing brine water, we have water production wells that pull water from those sands. And we actually have 3 of them on the site that pulls a gradient, a hydraulic gradient, towards us. So whatever brine water, or for that matter, whatever contaminants that are in the sinkhole, should ultimately migrate toward our water production wells, which is then used to produce salt water in a brine cavern, and then it goes to the marketplace. So we have sort of a natural, not a natural, but we have a built-in contaminant recovery system by virtue of our water production wells that contribute to our operations.
Well, I asked everybody to stay around. They'll stay around and answer some questions, but I see quite a few people have left already, so we're going to start by concluding. But let me, I want to thank Dr. Heacock. You know, at least he's one person that in all of this has come forward trying to determine what's going on. He's willing to say when he was wrong, that new developments have said, hey, you know, we were wrong on this, but we're looking at that. He's willing to tell you that the mandatory evacuation is appropriate right now, but they want additional seismic tests. So I can tell you, you know, from our perspective, and I like your approach, is that, you know, you want a level of confidence that you put your own children and grandchildren when you're thinking about how to explain or how to figure it out. So we thank you for being here. And I thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I think you're better off by having Mr. Heacock here, these people. I think, you know, we just want to know this. And the question keeps coming up in the paper over and over again, you know, what's the objectives? How do we get people home? We want to get people home, but we want to get people home safely. We just want factual answers. And if the question is, we're sitting here 4 years from now, and we still don't think it's safe to go home, we want to do is be there. But if we think, I understand, but the point being is that we don't want to tell somebody to go home if we don't think it's stable and we don't think it's safe. We don't want to just say something to give people an answer. We want the right answer. And we like your approach about a very measured approach. So we thank you for being here. Mark, you know, we appreciate you being here tonight to tell you what's going on in your property. But as Mr. Ashe asked the question, you know, these people not only are enduring what they're enduring, you know, all of these people here from all of these state agencies and all of these people with the Shaw are being paid for by these people.
That's right.
You know, they are Louisiana taxpayers that are paying to drill vent wells, geoprobe, monitoring, and they're paying the parish and state. We ask you to go back to your people in Texas with the message that we think that you all ought to step up, come forward, start footing some of this bill, putting appropriate vent wells in off of your property in accordance with the commissioner's orders, and we ask y'all to do that. I know you're not prepared to make those answers now, but as a request from the parish and the officials representing these people, we request y'all to go back and think about that, because not only are they having to do what they're doing, they're paying all of these people to try to remedy a situation that we believe is associated with your cabin.
And we can't bring our kids home at night.
Live in for 2 weeks and stay here by yourself and see all what's going on.
With that, thank you all for coming. We'll schedule one in the future. We'll let you know. But anybody has any questions, want to look at the exhibits, come forward. They've agreed to stay here a little bit longer.